Joe, we continue on our deep dives here today. We're going to stay in the ACC. We're going to go to South Carolina, and we're going to go to Clemson. Now, I'm going to start off by just saying this. Joe, I'm kind of surprised at a lot of things that Clemson does have returning when you look at it from a – now, look, here on this show, we are national, so we don't, continue to look at every one team until we get into these deep dives.
Yeah.
Klubnik, Maffa, Brenningstool, the number one passer, the number one rusher, and the number one receiver all return for Clemson. Joe, they got an entire offensive line returning that has I think two somewhat talented tackles and a lot of seniors in the interior. Barrett Carter returns. You got two of your top three tacklers returning. You have your top two of your top three sack producers returning. So I look at this and say to myself, Joe, are we kind of underlooking Clemson? And not just that. I think we're going to have to talk about, can that offensive side of the football develop, right? Like, we're going to have to talk about that at length. But if they do get better, Joe, I don't know if they're not a borderline playoff team in this expanded playoffs.
I don't think that we're underlooking them because, look, yes, we were critical, but for a very specific thing towards Dabo Swinney for
which we'll talk about.
And also, by the way, I appreciate this is something that I think always gets misunderstood when we do these deep dives. A lot of fans, we appreciate those that tune in. A lot don't understand the difference of a national perspective preview and like a beat reporter's team blog level of a deep dive team preview. The very different. Like, we're not going to have the very detailed shit of like who was taking the second team reps during the spring. We're not going to have that stuff. We just can't do that for 50 teams. That's one of my pet peeves when we do these, when you see the comments and the people who tag us on Twitter getting mad over really finite details that we can't really figure out.
Very minute details. I agree.
So what we're talking about here, you mentioned how they're bringing back a lot on defense. I mentioned earlier they're losing a number of players that went in the draft. Rukaroro was selected early. Nate Wiggins was selected early. Xavier Thomas is gone. Jeremiah Trotter is gone. They're losing those guys. But they're bringing back a lot. They're a deep team. They've always recruited really well on their defensive line and in their front seven and in their secondary. There's a really nice young group of guys that are up and coming. I am never worried about what Clemson does in the trenches and especially on defense. They have consistently on a year-to-year basis improved and reloaded. They've always been good on that side of the football. But what has hurt them over the past couple of seasons and last year particularly is that they have not had the production at receiver nor the quality of talent at receiver that they have needed to succeed in a conference that moves the ball really well through the air. This isn't the Big Ten. This isn't the SEC where we see all these ground and pound type teams. And Clemson's frankly not necessarily even built to really do that. I think Phil Maffa is a great running back. And I think that Brenningstool is one of the most underrated tight ends in the country and a guy that we probably should have put on our top 5 list. So I kind of regret not putting him on our list.
I agree with that.
But I just don't know what they've got at receiver. And I think that's a fair criticism.
Sorry, go ahead.
All I was going to say is I do know that there is this past recruiting cycle. They did a good job, but these guys are freshmen. Bryant Wesco is one who I'm paying attention to. Is very, very highly recruited, talented receiver.
They are very high on him and think that he can play, right?
Right.
Let me ask you this. Have they had bad quarterback play or bad receiver play?
It's been a perfect storm of both, and also bad play calling. It's been a perfect storm of all three things not working together.
If your quarterback is bad, then the play calling could have been okay, especially last year. Like Joe, let's be honest. There's no reason that if Cade Klubnik does not pull that ball and throw it against Florida State, they're going to beat Florida State in the fourth quarter. And I think that we're having a completely different conversation if you're talking about a 10-2 Clemson who upset Florida State. It's a completely different conversation. Now, they had some bad losses out of that, but at the end of the year, this young team did turn it around, and I think what 5-0 down the stretch of the season, or 5-0 down the stretch of the season. Well, what happened? The thing in the Tyler and Spartanburg or whatever it was called. calls into the show and Dabo goes off, his team starts playing better. I agree with you on receiver play the last couple of seasons, but I also got to say the bigger thing to me has been quarterback play. Now, here's the question that I would ask. At what point do we see a team like Clemson? Because, look, it's one thing, and we'll talk about the portal in a minute, to not go out there and get those type of guys. It's another thing to say that Dabo Swinney hasn't had a track record of development of players. Like, that's not true. Like, one thing that you do have to give him is that. So now my question becomes
development of defensive players.
No, I mean, I thought Deshaun Watson developed in front of our eyes. I thought T. Higgins, Taj Boyd.
Yeah, but when is the last time that they've had like a premier offensive player since one of those guys?
Probably 2020, 2021. When Lawrence and all of those guys were coming out, like T. Higgins and those guys were coming out. I'm not disagreeing, but Joe, we have a decade plus of him developing that position group, both quarterback and wide receiver. Let's not act like Deshaun Hopkins or Hopkins
Watson
was.
Jesus Christ,
D-Hop wasn't a receiver. Let's not act like
DeAndre Hopkins
didn't exist. The Rodgers kid didn't exist. I'm not saying that they're there at all. My question, though, becomes, can they develop with this much production returning offensively? That becomes my question. Because are they going to regress? I don't think that they're going to regress.
But the question I'm not asking is if there's going to be a regression. I don't think that there's going to be a regression, but stagnation to me is on the table. And if they stagnate, they're the same team as that they were last year. This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying here with their defense. I know that they're going to figure the pieces out, and I know that the puzzle is going to be really good on the defensive side of the football. But because of, you're removing Will Shipley, but Phil Maffa steps up as the lead back.
He was their leading rusher last year.
Phil Maffa was really freaking good. He was a really, really good back for them, especially down the stretch, the way that he played. So I know that their run game is going to be good. But again, Bo Collins is out of the equation. He goes to Notre Dame. Who are the guys that are going to step up? Because even if Garrett Riley has more of an open control in the offense, and Cade Klubnik is a bit more decisive and makes some better decisions. I didn't think that Cade Klubnik was bad. I think that was one of the worst descriptions and misdirections of blame for a young kid that he received. For a redshirt freshman, I thought that he did some nice things, and we were so used to Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, all these guys being phenomenal that he suffered a lot of hate for no reason.
He wasn't worse than DJU.
No, absolutely not. He was better than DJU was as a redshirt sophomore compared to when he was a redshirt sophomore. So that's why I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure he's going to improve. But again, I keep coming back to here. Are their receivers going to be better enough? And I'm not coming on here and saying, Clemson fans, that they won't be better. I don't have any evidence to prove that it will be. I just don't.
This entire offense, to me, goes in one single bubble: development. That's all. Because Joe, you have three.
Yeah, because they don't go in the portal, so like we have to hope that there's development.
Hold on before we get there, because we're going to get there. So hold on with that for just a second. Their roster is who their roster is. Okay, my question becomes now for them offensively, Joe. It's all about how good this coaching staff is at this exact moment. How much this team cares about being better. You got 3 of your top 4 receivers to returning. 3 of the 4. And I get what you're saying. You got 4 starting offensive linemen returning. Brenningstool's returning. Klubnik and Maffa are returning. At what point do we see a team that's 9-3, okay, last year, or 9-4, excuse me, last year? Joe, do they take that next step and get that 10th win? And then I think that we have to change our philosophy and thought process on Clemson. But, Joe, if they've got 10 wins in that conference, when you have Miami, Florida State, NC State, who we'll talk about in a minute, and Virginia Tech, who we think is going to be a riser. At what point does 10-2 not get them in any kind of, not in there, just conversation, right? And we'll talk about portal, but are we 100% sure that they're going to be stagnant?
You know what? To give an answer to that, yeah, I think that they're going to be stagnant because I look at the roster, I look at the receiving core. I don't have enough evidence that's going to sit here and tell me that that is going to improve. And as I mentioned, Bryant Wesco is somebody who, whenever I listen to these recruiting pods that I like to tune into, he gets brought up a lot. He gets brought up a lot about somebody who could take a huge step forward for them and be an impact freshman. But you can't solely rely on a freshman to be your receiving production. I will say this though, if like we're looking at their schedule for next year, they didn't get a necessarily easy draw. So that's where the 10-2 comes into play. And I don't know if they necessarily match up well enough with some of these teams to accomplish 10-2. I think another 9-3 season is more realistic.
All right, explain on that. Continue on. Who are the teams?
Okay. The ones that I highlighted, they play Georgia. We've got some pretty fun fight going on the YouTube channel in the comments of that game that when we talked about it a couple weeks ago. That video's popped off, by the way. They take NC State on at home. They go to Florida State. They play Louisville at home, Virginia Tech at home, and then South Carolina at home. I'm not worried about South Carolina. Yada yada yada. Virginia Tech, NC State, and Louisville are all not easy games.
Well, Georgia for sure. Like they're not beating them. I think like we're so beyond that. But Joe, I look at them: Appalachian State, NC State, Stanford. They got Florida State. Now I'm gonna get back to that one in just a minute. Wake Forest, Virginia, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, the Citadel, South Carolina. Joe, I could tell you that I feel like there's 9 to 10 teams that they're better than on that schedule. They have.
I think that there are
better talent, especially defensively.
I don't think that there are 9 teams on that schedule that I can sit here confidently on June 12th.
Do they have more talent than Virginia Tech?
Yes, they've got more talent.
Do they have more talent for sure than Louisville?
Wait. The conversation of if they've got more talent does not always just immediately mean that they're going to beat them.
Well, that's what I just said. I think that they're more talented than 10 of those teams. I didn't. That was the point that I made. So let's not change a goalpost in reference to me just saying, like, I legitimately said just pure talent.
All right.
Take Dabo's crazy ass out of it.
Okay. I don't think that they're more talented than Georgia and Florida State, though, to this point. And
that's why I say 10-2.
But we're optimistically assuming that they clear through that stretch of mid-tier ACC teams of NC State, Louisville, and Virginia Tech.
I'm not with you on them being stagnant offensively.
What do you have to go off of that they're going to be better offensively?
Because they're returning 4 of their 5 offensive linemen. I know you hate this website, but this is not their statistic. It's just a football statistic in general. When 4 or more offensive linemen return if they started last season when they return, the running production is up 30% the following year. So, but
I already know what the offensive line is like and what the run game is going to be like because we saw it last year.
Okay, so if they get better there, at some point, I do think Cade Klubnik gets better and progresses and makes better decisions. I am just buying. I'm not really ready to throw him out with the bathwater.
Neither am I. I just defended him.
He had a rough season. I agree with you on Dabo. What you're really trying to say, at least the way that I see it.
There's a very specific thing that I'm trying to say. There is no interpretation.
You don't think that
I don't know what they have. I don't think that they have the receivers necessary.
Okay, can I ask you a question without you being mad?
Go ahead.
Do you think that the same for like a Notre Dame?
Stop. We're not talking about Notre Dame. But Notre Dame actually went in the portal. They took one of their goddamn receivers. So let's not talk about Notre Dame.
Collins,
hold on. To do with this.
We're gonna get to them in just a minute. The portal in just a minute. My question is that we've seen teams that do have issues at that position, and I asked you if it's quarterback or receiver, and then your favorite team took one of the receivers that everybody thought was bad. We had discussions.
He was one of their better receivers last year, though.
Me and you had a lot of discussions on Bo Collins last year, and I told you, for example, last year's Florida State game, Joe, the four catches I remember vividly in that game, he had to go up the ladder, the diving catch on the sideline when it's 4th down and Clemson's trying to push to go into the end zone.
Would you argue that he was their best receiver last year?
Oh, without question.
Okay, well, he's gone.
But here's the thing. He wasn't the only one that would be wide ass open. I remember in that game vividly, I think it was Herb Street on the call saying, here's an open receiver. Here's an open receiver. Here's an open receiver. And Klubnik's not making those decisions. All I am saying is I think that he gets better, and I think as an offense they get better. I don't think they're going to be stagnant. So the question
I think you're being too optimistic here.
That they can go 9-3, 10-2?
No. I don't know. Wait, hold on a second. This always gets missed when we sit here and argue over this stuff. 9-3 is my projection for them. I think 10-2 is a little too optimistic, but where I'm pointing out where I think you're overly optimistic, again, is this assumption that suddenly their receiving room gets figured out. That is an enormous question mark. Again, we have no evidence to put together an argument that supports that their receiving room will improve in 2024.
I mean, you do have a decade's worth. Okay, so you do. Now, let's get to the portal. I agree with you on what you're saying in reference to the receiver room. I'm not disagreeing. Mm-hmm. And it's why Dabo should be hitting the portal, if we're being honest. I mean,
there were a lot of good receivers, a lot of former 4-star, 5-star receivers that, he claims aren't good enough for him, but in actuality, there are guys that could have at least come in as competition, that could have at least come in as bodies, as depth. That's a problem.
No, I mean, listen, I'm not going to disagree with that. Even defensively, I don't think that his philosophy and not going in the portal is going to benefit him easily at all. But if you're saying 9-3 is realistic for them, that means that my opinion of 10 more talented teams than him could suffice. Now, I would agree with you on this, Joe. They're not going to get back to where they were, and we'll have this conversation every single year. They're not going to get back to where they were if they don't hit the portal, and that's just the facts behind it. So if they're 9-3, they're in the exact same position they were last year. If they're 10-2, they're a game better. So I don't think it's overly optimistic on them that I think they might win a game or more better. But until they go into the portal, that's about all they're going to be.
I stand with that point. I stick behind that this is what's holding them back. They are a team that is consistently good at developing and producing talent at a number of positions, as we've talked about, especially on the defensive side of the football. So we could come in every single year knowing that they're going to be really good on defense. They've got this one kid at defensive tackle who was a rotational player who has serious NFL interest as a early day 2 pick, even as a first round pick. And I'm talking about Jesus Christ, DeMonte Capehart, who is like a freak, 6'5", 320 pounds. He is a demolishing kid. He's going to be their next big defensive tackle. Like, they've got bodies there. Well, but all these other teams that they're competing with at the top of the ACC had issues on their roster, hopped to the portal, found guys to fill them, and didn't just rely on high school recruiting. You can't anymore in college football when you have a roster hole just slowly wait and develop guys. You can't.
I will say this. You talked about their defensive line. Look, TJ Parker's a kid that was a freshman last year, had 5.5 sacks. Okay. And you're adding a big time defensive tackle into the mix here. Joe, I just don't think people, when they talk about Clemson, they look and say, oh, this is a bad loss. That's a bad loss. We all agree that these are bad losses, but they're bad losses based off of where they were 4 years ago. Right? They're bad because, look, they were in the playoff 4 years ago. So I look at them and say, I think that they are somewhat ironically, and what might be the most frustrating to them as Clemson fans, I do think that they could be on the preface if they are just go back into the portal. They could get back to where they were. Like, I think that they're talented enough that if they would have gone and added the kid from North Texas, okay?
Yeah, that's a good point. They added Jamori Macklin.
Room. Right. So the question becomes, if they would have added those pieces, I think that you would have come in here and said to yourself, Okay, I could see 10-2. I could see them losing to Georgia, losing to Florida State, and that being the end of it.
You love to give me shit when I bring up hypotheticals. I mean, like, this is such a fat hypothetical that wasn't going to happen.
No, but we're talking about Dabo going into the portal. How more hypothetical can we be? I have to paint a scenario because it's a scenario because the head coach won't do it.
Yeah, so
it's a It's like
it's almost a moot point, like talking about it because he's not going to do it.
It's kind of like, what was that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio where he had to spin the cap to see if he was in the reality or
Inception.
I feel like when you're telling me don't get hypotheticals, well, I'm in Inception with Dabo going into the portal.
It's never going to happen. Hey, and look, I will give him credit. Last recruiting cycle, they did a good job at getting some more premier receiving talent. But waiting a couple of years doesn't solve their problems for 2024. Very rarely do freshman receivers explode onto the scene. It's just not a common thing that happens.
No, it's not. It legitimately isn't. I mean, I'm trying to think of one. Can you remember?
Well, NC State actually has a kid that we're about to talk about in Casey Concepcion, who's a freaking dog. But that's probably the easiest one I can think of. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.